Alright guys, so now we're back to the decks again, but you'll see that the setup is a little bit different in this particular video. In the previous video, the one we talked about turntables and beat matching, you guys saw a simple 2-deck setup with the mixer in the middle. Today we actually have 4 decks. You'll see that these guys right here are brand new. They weren't in the last video. I'll talk about these 2 guys. These are called CDJs, and you can see the familiar turntables off to the sides here. So we're going to focus in on the CDJs today, and we're also going to talk about the mixer, because in the previous video I did talk about the mixer kind of in brief, kind of a basic signal flow, but I didn't really talk about the functions in depth. So I'd like to cover a little bit more in detail, so you guys know exactly what everything on the mixer does. Okay, so what I'm going to go ahead and do is let me go ahead and talk about the mixer first, just so we have the natural progression of talking about the decks from the previous video and sort of the basics of beat matching, and then now talking about the mixer, so you kind of have an understanding of how exactly how you can manipulate the sound on the mixer as you're beat matching and mixing and so on. Okay, so again, coming back to the mixer here, this is a 4-channel mixer. The way we know that it's a 4-channel mixer is that we have 4 rows of these columns of knobs and faders. This is an Allen Heath Xone 42. There's lots of different mixers on the market. There's 2-channel mixers that only have 2 columns and are a bit more compact. There's mixers that could potentially have even more than 4 channels, although in the DJing world, the tendency, or actually the vast majority of mixers that you'll see are 4-channel mixers. If you go to a club or a festival or any sort of semi-pro DJing setup, you'll notice that a very common mixer brand is Pioneer, and I'm sure you guys, if you've been interested in DJing, you've probably seen the name Pioneer either like on the CDJs, or you've seen the mixers before, or you've heard it advertised or talked about before. So Pioneer is really really common in clubs and festivals. The club itself here at UCSD doesn't necessarily own a Pioneer mixer, although we do have access to one through the tech services here on campus. So we've definitely had exposure to it, and like I said, if you ever go to a club, you'll probably see a Pioneer mixer. But in terms of basic functionality, Pioneer mixers aren't really that much different from an Allen Heath mixer. There's just a slightly different layout, some additional controls like effects sections and additional mic controls and whatnot. And it all depends on which particular model you have or you're talking about. Okay, so coming back to this particular mixer, the Xone 42, I talked about in the last video about the basic signal flow of how the signal comes through the mixer and gets output to the speakers. So remember, the mixer is basically this like hub of where all your decks, all your devices that are outputting sound are connected to, and this hub basically outputs all those sound switches together into the speakers, both for the main speakers that go out to the crowd, and also the speakers that you as a DJ have on stage facing you. So basically, the signal comes in from the top here through the cables. Usually they're through these RCA cables. Sometimes you'll see on digital cables, but they'll come in through the top here, and each particular channel, as we call them, has its separate inputs. And actually, usually each channel has a pair of inputs. So you could actually have 2 different decks hooked up to each individual channel, and you can switch between them using either a flip switch or a little toggle switch, I should say, or one of these buttons that toggle which channel or which input you're actually using. Okay, so the first thing that the signal hits when it comes in through the RCA cable here is this level knob. On Pioneer mixers or other mixers, you might see it called gain. I guess the technical term really is gain for it in a lot of the audio parlance. But level gain, same thing here. Basically, this covers the control of how strong your signal is coming into the mixer. So the reason why we have this control is that different recordings depending on how they were recorded, where they were recorded, who was recording them, or what the purpose was of it, could potentially have different volume levels. So some tracks are louder, some tracks are quieter, and in order to be able to equalize everything and make sure that your output is consistent, you use the gain knob to adjust how loud or how quiet each track is on each one of the channels. Okay, so like I said in the previous video, when you're playing a track, you want to make sure that you adjust this knob here, this gain knob, so that the lights on the channel down here hit around 0. Okay, so you're not going too high, too low. You kind of have that benchmark of 0 right on the scale here. Okay, it's probably usually okay to go up 1 or 2 lights above that, depending on the venue or the person you're working with for sound. But the idea is to always have it around 0 so that it's consistent. Okay, and not clipping. Okay, so the next thing you hit in the signal flow is this knob, this button here, this input knob, or input button I should say again, sorry. This is what I just talked about earlier, about switching between which device is active on the channel. And then you hit these 3 knobs here, which are called the EQ knobs, and these control how much of the high, mid, and low frequencies you can hear in your output. That's coming in from your deck. So, for example, you might be playing a track and you're going to be mixing in another track from another channel in. Well, in order to make sure that everything is in balance and that you're not overdoing one of the frequency bands here, you probably will manipulate the EQs so that, you know, for example, the highs and lows are down, the mids are lows, and then as you're mixing in, you might start turning up the highs or the mids, and doing something similar on the other track to sort of balance things out. There's actually sort of there's different ways of approaching EQs and how you manipulate them to get a good sound, but these are basically what will control that for you. Okay. So yeah, so this will cut, for example, this will cut the lows, you know, you'll cut out the bass. The mids tend to cut out basically most of the audible instrumentation that's sort of in the mid frequencies. So for example, you know, if you have like piano sounds in your track or vocals or any sort of melodic noises, I should say, will probably most likely be affected by the mid EQ knob. And then really high frequency sounds, kind of like hi-hats or cymbal crashes or anything that's kind of higher in the audio spectrum, will be excuse me, will be affected by the high frequency knob here. Okay. On the Zone 42, we have a really cool thing called a filter. That is the next thing on our signal path here. This button will actually toggle the filter on and off, and the controls for the filter are here on the side. And basically what a filter does is it allows you to sort of, in a way, let me see, how's the best way to describe this? It lets you sweep over the frequency range. So for example, I might be playing a track here, and I may want to sort of start cutting out the lows and then only have the high frequencies pass through. Well, I can do that with the filter knob here, and I can manipulate how low I'm cutting off, and then I can sweep up through the audio to start cutting out more and more of the low frequencies until I only have highs. And so this is a really cool effect that you'll hear a lot when DJs play, and it just adds a little bit of flavor to your mixing, adds some tension and some excitement to the sound, and so this is a really cool effect here that you can manipulate. And I'll show this a little bit later on in the video so you can actually hear how this sounds, but just be aware that this is what this does, okay? On the Allen Heath, there's also a dry and wet knob here. This is for the send and return section of the mixer. So basically, you have an output that is for an external device, like an effects unit, that you can output the sound from the mixer to, and it'll return the sound with some kind of effect. And this knob will control how much of that effect you can actually hear in the audio coming out from the mixer. we don't have an effects unit here at the club, so you probably won't see this used really at all. But just be aware that that's what that's for. Then the Q buttons here. This is to control how much, or not how much. This is to control whether or not you can actually hear this track that's toggled using this button in the headphones. So for example, let's say that this track is playing up right now, and I'm going to go ahead and want to listen to channel 1 in my headphones along with this channel 4 track here. So what I'll do is I'll go ahead and toggle Q on channel 1, and I'll make sure my volume's right on the headphones. And then in order to hear, so when I put my headphones on, you'll notice that the channel 1 will be playing in the headphones, but channel 4 won't be. And that's because this mix knob here that says Q and mix is currently set to Q. So that means that anything that's toggled here using these buttons will only be audible. Only those two, for example, like 1 and 3 here, will be audible in the headphones because it's all the way to Q. If I want to hear whatever is actually whatever is actually playing out to the crowd through the main speakers, like for example channel 4 here, I'll just start turning this knob towards mix, and slowly you'll start hearing channel 4 or whatever channel is currently playing to the crowd start to creep into your audio in your headphones, and you'll be able to balance out how much of the Q you can hear versus the main, and that way be able to beat match and do whatever it is you need to do in your headphones. Okay, so that's that. And then like I mentioned in the last video, these are called upfaders here. These are basically the second to last control, or actually third to last if you count the crossfader. But these are what control whether or not you can actually hear the track playing in the main speakers out to the crowd. So anything that is up like this is playing out to the crowd. So anything that's down is not playing to the crowd and is potentially only audible through your headphones. Okay. Then we hit the crossfader here. Basically what the crossfader does is kind of like the upfaders here, except that you only have control between two channels, channel X and channel Y. And channel X and channel Y are assignable to any of these 4 channels here using these buttons. And actually it's currently turned off. So if I hit this button right here, X fader off, and the light is off here, but these lights are on, whatever is currently green will be playing, whatever is green will be playing through X, and whatever is red will be playing through Y. And you can actually see a little diagram here on the buttons. And so basically, for example, if I want to be able to cut between let's say channel 1 and channel 4, then I'll have X be channel 1, so it's green, and then channel 4 be Y, and then I can cut between, with these two guys up, I'll actually be able to cut through these two channels. Okay. And so that's the crossfader. Usually we have this turned off because most DJs I've seen, unless you're like a turntablist or you're into scratching, usually people tend to use the upfaders instead of the crossfader. Okay, so I'll turn the crossfader off here. And then the last thing that I probably really want to talk about, aside from the mic section here, is the mix and the booth knob on the mixer. And the mix knob is basically the main output level for the mixer. So however high you set this is however much signal you're going to send out to the speakers, to the main speakers that are going to be facing the crowd. And then the booth is basically same thing, except instead of the main speakers being controlled by this knob, it's the booth speakers, or in other words, the speakers that are on stage facing you, the DJ. So for example, the sound engineer at the venue will probably have you set this to whatever that they decide is a good level, and you won't touch the mix knob from that point onwards, because this is already set to whatever the sound engineer wants it to be at. But you can control the booth. So for example, you're playing and the previous DJ had, the booth speakers that are facing you playing really loud, so like cranked up to there. Well, you can easily just turn them down and make them a little quieter and a little easier to manage with by turning this down like that. Okay? And that's pretty much it on the mixer. Other than the mic section here, so if you have a microphone, you can plug a microphone in here, and then similar controls. You have a gain knob here to control how high the signal is coming into the mixer, and then the high frequency, low frequency cuts or EQs, and then a main output level similar to the speaker level, which will control how much of the mic you can actually hear coming out of the mixer. And that's pretty much it to cover the mixer here. Again, if I missed anything or if you have any questions about anything on the mixer, feel free to ask your trainer. They'll be able to better answer the questions, because you'll be right in front of the mixer and you can point to something and say, hey, what does that do? And they'll be able to explain it to you. But like I said, if I miss anything, feel free to do that. Otherwise, we're going to go ahead and move on to talking about the CDJs and how those work and how you can utilize them in your DJing endeavors here at DVC.